Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports a rise in cases of COVID-19 as it ramps up efforts to stop a fourth wave of the virus. Schools in Seoul will be offering virus tests to anyone who wants one, and that'll go to all schools if it works well. South Korea's producer prices rise for a fifth month in a row, which means higher costs for consumers down the road. The rise due to higher prices for oil and utilities. And a South Korean court dismisses a lawsuit against the Japanese government seeking compensation for the women sexually enslaved by Japan during World War II. The court says it has no jurisdiction over Japan, even though it ruled the opposite way in a similar case earlier this year. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea today reported more than 700 new cases of COVID-19 for the first time in a week. This includes 6 members of the country's national wrestling team back from a tournament in Kazakhstan. And in response to a rise in cases at schools, the Education Ministry has announced that it's going to do tests at schools in Seoul. Paeun-ji has the details.
Amid growing concerns of another wave of the outbreak, South Korea reported 731 new COVID-19 cases on Wednesday, the first time in a week that the daily tally has surpassed the 700 mark. Meanwhile, there have been more than 2,000 cases among students and teachers since schools returned in March. The Ministry of Education on Wednesday announced that the next 3 weeks until May 11th will be a special virus prevention period, with schools being closely monitored until late June.
The Ministry of Education will run an on-site inspection team to inspect all facilities under the ministry's jurisdiction, including kindergartens, elementary, middle, high schools, college, and prep schools. I will be in charge of this until June.
The ministry also said on a trial basis, a testing team will visit schools in Seoul to conduct PCR tests for anyone who wishes to have one. If this trial run proves effective in Seoul, it will be expanded to schools nationwide. Adding to the nation's caseload, a total of 7 people from the national wrestling team tested positive. 6 returned to Korea and 1 is still abroad. The Korea Wrestling Federation said Wednesday that 6 out of 24 players who returned to Korea from a tournament in Kazakhstan on Monday tested positive and are currently in quarantine facilities. Paeun-ji, Arirang News.
The European Medicines Agency is now saying that the benefits of the vaccine from Johnson & Johnson outweigh the very rare risk of developing blood clots. Some countries, including the U.S., have paused their rollout of the J&J vaccine while the risks are reviewed. Rollout will resume, though, in the EU. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The European Medicines Agency was clear Tuesday that the benefits of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine outweigh the risk of not taking it.
The benefits of the vaccine continue to outweigh these risks, and we now have detailed information in the labeling that alerts to these risks.
This means a warning about unusual blood clots will be added to the product information for the vaccine, so healthcare professionals and people who receive the shot will be aware of the possibility of very rare cases of blood clots. According to the EMA, it researched all available evidence, including 8 reports from the U.S. of unusual blood clots, one of which led to someone's death. The analysis is also based on more than 7 million people who received the vaccine in the U.S. as of April 7th. Despite the very rare chance of developing blood clots, the EMA cautioned recipients of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to watch out for certain symptoms.
As for the symptoms to look out are shortness of breath, chest pain, swelling in the leg, persistent abdominal pain, neurological symptoms, and that includes a severe headache or persistent headache, blurred vision, and skin bruising beyond the site of the injection.
Johnson & Johnson confirmed Tuesday that it would resume shipments of its vaccines to the EU after the EMA's review. The single-dose vaccine was initially given the green light in the EU on March 11th. However, despite the recent review, it remains to be seen how different countries will interpret the guidance. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea has announced a round of economic relief payments to low-income households to be paid out from next month. The Central Disaster Management Headquarters announced Wednesday that these households will be getting a one-time payment of 500,000 Korean won, which is about $480. The agency said it aims to support those who've seen their incomes drop in the pandemic but have not been able to benefit from the welfare system. It's for households making less than 75% of the median income. That threshold is about 3,650,000 won a month, roughly $3,300. Online applications start in the third week of May and offline the week after that. South Korea's producer prices rose last month for the fifth month in a row, a sign of inflation for consumers down the road. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that its producer price index for March came to 106.8, an on-month increase of 0.9%. Compared to the same period last year, the figure was up 3.9%. The prices of industrial goods rose 1.6%, led by higher oil prices, and the prices of electricity, water, and gas edged up 0.9%. South Korea's exports of the traditional dish kimchi hit an all-time high in the first quarter of this year, and its kimchi trade surplus was the biggest in 11 years. According to the Korea Customs Service, outbound shipments of kimchi came to more than $46 million, an increase from a year earlier of 52%. That exceeded imports of kimchi by more than $8 million. Experts say there's been growing worldwide interest in the benefits of kimchi for the immune system. The biggest export destinations were Japan, the U.S., and Hong Kong. Fully 100% of Korea's kimchi imports were from China. An online expo is being held to help South Korean companies exporting consumer goods like electronics and cosmetics. It's called Kwave Celebrities' Favorite Korean Products, and it's showcasing a wide variety of products enjoyed by celebrities and influencers, many of whom you may have seen right here on Arirang TV. Min Soo-kyun reports.
Organized by Korea's trade promotion agency, the e-commerce platform Buy Korea is showcasing a wide range of products featured on Arirang TV. These include cosmetics, clothing, and electronic devices, all tried out by Korean celebrities and influencers on Arirang programs K-Unboxing and K-Biz. So far, 62 businesses have joined the online expo to promote their products to overseas markets.
Before COVID-19, I usually attended 10 to 20 trade fairs and exhibitions a year. But today, during my meeting, I realized that this could actually be more effective than 10 trade fairs since you get to sit down with buyers who are really interested in your product.
Overseas buyers who are interested in Korean products can easily browse the page to explore more than 100 consumer items. They can also get more information by watching the product review videos.
I was able to, look around and browse, and I think having the videos about the product in English is actually really, really helpful, especially for people like myself who aren't able to understand so easily. So that was a big part of why we loved it so much.
To connect local suppliers with overseas buyers, the Digital Expo arranges one-on-one business meetings with free interpreting services in 15 languages.
So KOTRA did a very good job in terms of understanding the language levels, the advancements between each of the suppliers. There are situations where we run into language difficulty challenges. KOTRA did a good job in terms of finding us a good match. Not only in just language translation, but also the ability to actually understand industry-specific vocabularies.
The expo follows an MOU signed last year between Arirang TV and the Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, in which the two have agreed to assist local startups and small and medium-sized enterprises.
By enhancing marketing efficiency through influencers and video contents for overseas buyers, we expect to achieve great results from the KOTRA Arirang exhibition.
The expo began on April 5th and will run until the end of this month. Organizers say they will receive business inquiries and arrange meetings beyond this date to help more local startups and SMEs reach a global audience.
민숙현, 아리랑 뉴스.
The global shortage of semiconductors is hitting automakers around the world. Here in Korea, General Motors has had to shut down 2 of its plants for a week. And Hyundai Motor once again suspended its Sonata plant on Monday and Tuesday. The shortage has gone on for months and there's little sign of improvement. So how is it that this shortage came to affect the entire global supply chain? And how is the situation being dealt with by companies and governments? For more on this, our Kim Sung-min joins us here in the studio. So, Sung-min, you've spent some time digging into this issue. Just how serious would you say the situation is now?
Hi, Devin. It's actually quite serious right now. Just in South Korea, the automobile industry is forecast to produce 120,000 fewer units this year due to the chip shortage. That's roughly 3.4% of the 3.5 million cars the Korean automakers produced last year. GM Korea is the latest Korean auto company to halt its assembly lines. 2 days ago, it suspended production at its Bupyeong plants 1 and 2 for a week.
3.4%. It sounds like this is a major hit to take for these companies.
Yes, given that the combined production of the 2 plants amounted to some 23,000 units in March, they're expected to see a loss of around 6,000 units.
And GM, of course, isn't the only one. Let's see, other car makers need a lot of chips, of course, for the high-tech cars that they're making these days. So how about the others?
Yes, Hyundai Motors suspended 2 factories, one of them being the plant producing the company's all-electric vehicle Ioniq 5, which was launched just 2 days ago to great fanfare. But with the halt, industry watchers expect a loss of 6,500 units of the model, which is huge considering 40,000 units had been pre-booked ahead of the official launch. As for other global firms, General Motors and Ford have shut down some of their North American factories since February and are extending their shutdowns. In February, GM said it expected the chip shortage to cut its earnings by up to $2 billion this year. That's almost as much as its quarterly net profit, as the company made $2.85 billion in the 4th quarter of last year. Ford also said its earnings will be hit by $1 to $2.5 billion in 2021. And overall, the consulting firm Alex Partners expects the shortage will cost the global automobile industry $60.6 billion in revenue this year.
Well, Sung-min, cars these days have so many features that they didn't used to have even just 5 years ago. A lot of people might not realize just how essential these semiconductors are to the car industry.
Right, automobiles might not be the first thing to pop up in our heads when we think of semiconductors, but surprisingly, around 200 to 300 chips are needed to build just one car. They're used for making sensors to detect obstacles when parking, to check the pressure of tires, and for airbags to deploy. This is for automobiles in general, but electric cars need 2 to 3 times more chips, and self-driving cars need more than 2,000 chips for one car.
So everything from the airbags to the door locks to the self-driving systems that they have these days. But going back a little bit, how did this whole shortage situation come about?
Well, simply put, the industry failed to forecast the demand. With the COVID-19 raging across borders, many expected the automobile industry to be hit hard. So manufacturers producing chips for cars, they shifted their assembly lines to produce semiconductors for other IT products like PCs and smartphones, which saw massive increases in demand with the social distancing measures. But the automobile industry bounced back quicker than anyone could have expected, to the point where the supply couldn't keep up with the demand.
And if we go beyond Korea, looking at the biggest chip foundry in the world, TSMC in Taiwan, they lost power at a facility which cost them up to $27 million worth of production. So surely this would have made the situation for those who need these chips around the world much worse.
Yes, you're right. There have been some other issues that severely aggravated the supply shortage, as well as the power outage at TSMC, the winter storm at that ravaged Texas, the center of U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, forced many factories to shut earlier this year. And Japan's Renesas, the world's third largest automobile chip producer, also suffered a factory fire that could take 4 months to recover from. And these incidents all further deepen the already serious global chip supply woes.
Well, now a lot of people might be wondering, this is South Korea, which is a powerhouse when it comes to chip production. And yet, we're affected by this too. It turns out that South Korean chip makers actually don't produce the kinds of chips that are needed for automobiles. In fact, Korean automakers import 98% of the chips that they need. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it seems a bit ironic, but experts say that local chip firms actually prefer to concentrate on other types of chips.
There has been constant research on automotive chips, but domestic car manufacturers prefer foreign products and automotive chips have low profitability. So the local supply ended up being very small. They chose not to produce them. It's not that they can't produce them.
So, Sungmin, I think you've laid out the case pretty well here about how serious this problem is and how many regions of the world and industries and companies that it affects. But how are companies and how are governments responding to this? How are we dealing with it?
Well, automobile companies are, of course, trying to secure as much stock as possible. But what's more interesting is the effort coming from the government. Just last week, South Korea had an expanded economy-related ministerial meeting where President Moon Jae-in pledged strong support. They're expected to come up with a detailed plans within the first half of this year, including assistance to improve the weak supply chain, adjusting the amount of tax deducted for research and development, and expanding investment. The country, in fact, has broader plans for next generation cars, planning to spend $330 million for R&D into next generation vehicles. And other nations are also ramping up efforts to place themselves at the center of the global automotive chip supply chain. U.S. President Joe Biden recently met with executives in the semiconductor industry and proposed $50 billion of support for chip manufacturing and research. China aims to increase its local semiconductor supply by up to 70% by 2025.
So it seems like governments really are taking this issue seriously, as Biden's semiconductor summit that you pointed out and other ways that manufacturers are trying to address this. But at this point, how long do we think that the semiconductor shortage will last?
Well, Devin, unfortunately, experts say that this might prevent the future shortage in the long term, but will not become an instant fix.
The impact could last until next year due to unexpected situations along with rapidly growing global car industry, especially electric cars. Even if the chip makers increase their production, it'll take at least a year.
As I briefly mentioned, the fact that we're at the transition period into next generation cars could put even more pressure on the industry. But I guess this incident has become a very valuable lesson for many countries because it'll definitely accelerate the development of semiconductors, which are crucial for future industries.
So it could stretch into next year, but it's a lesson that countries will remember long beyond that. Thank you, Sungmin, for being here today.
Thank you.
Earlier this year, for the first time, a court in South Korea ruled that the Japanese government has to pay compensation to the victims of Japan's system of wartime sexual slavery, those known euphemistically as the comfort women. But now another case similar to that one has just been dismissed by the same court, which ruled that it has no jurisdiction in the matter because of Japan's sovereign immunity. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
A regional court in Seoul has dismissed a civil suit on compensating the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery system, saying it has no jurisdiction due to the concept of state immunity. This means the case won't even get tried. The decision sides with the Japanese government's claim of sovereign immunity and goes against a ruling which saw a different group of plaintiffs win their claim against the Japanese government earlier this year. Seoul Central District Court on Wednesday said, when we recognize exemptions of sovereign immunity, diplomatic clashes will inevitably ensue. In addition, the court used the case of the 2015 bilateral agreement between the two countries as one of the reasons behind the decision. It said that despite some of the voices of the victims and organizations being undermined in that agreement, it wasn't enough to consider the agreement void, with some of the victims being compensated through it as well. Joining this round's 20 plaintiffs was Lee Yong-soo, a 93-year-old, quote, comfort women survivor, well known around the world for her efforts in holding the Japanese government to account. Comfort women is a euphemism that refers to the hundreds of thousands of victims of sexual slavery.
너무 황당합니다. 너무 황당해요. 어쨌거나 저 결과가 좋게 나고 나쁘게 나고 가네. 국제사법재판소로 갑니다. 꼭 갑니다. 저는 이 말밖에 할 말이 없습니다.
The case was brought to court in 2016 but has been constantly delayed due to Japanese government's unresponsive stance. But in a similar case in January this year, the court said the immunity didn't apply to systematic crimes against humanity. In that case, it told the Japanese government to pay more than $90,000 to each of the 12 plaintiffs. Tokyo remained silent and unresponsive, resulting in no appeal and the decision being final in favor of the victims. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the South Korean government has expressed deep disappointment and regret over the latest offerings and visits made by Japanese leaders to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine. That shrine honors Japan's war dead, including more than a dozen Class A war criminals. Seoul's foreign ministry on Wednesday once again urged Japanese politicians to face history and to demonstrate through action their sincere reflection on the past so that Seoul and Tokyo can build a future-oriented relationship. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe went to the shrine in person on Wednesday, and current Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga sent a ritual tree offering. Former police officer Derek Chauvin has been found guilty of murder in the killing of George Floyd. The verdict prompted celebrations in Floyd's hometown and around the U.S. Kim Yeon-sung reports.
Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty by the jury Tuesday on all 3 charges related to the death of George Floyd.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty.
Chauvin was found guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. This verdict comes almost a year after Floyd died as a result of Chauvin kneeling on his neck for more than 9 minutes, despite Floyd being handcuffed. The viral video sparked mass movements worldwide, demanding racial equality and justice for George Floyd. Now many rejoice that justice has finally been served.
I feel relieved today that I finally have the opportunity for hopefully getting some sleep. Today, we are able to breathe again.
Many, including President Biden, said the verdict was a step in the right direction.
No one should be above the law. And today's verdict sends that message. But it's not enough. We can't stop here. In order to deliver real change and reform, we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will ever happen and occur again.
This verdict does give a message to his family that he was somebody, that his life mattered, that all of our lives matter, and that's important.
Crowds that have been waiting for the verdict in Minneapolis also erupted in joy upon word of the news.
I feel like the fact that we were able to secure justice for George Floyd means that we can secure justice for every Black person who was killed by police.
Chauvin's sentence will be handed down in the coming weeks. State guidelines suggest that since Chauvin has no criminal history, he might be sentenced to slightly over 12 years in prison for the counts of murder and 4 years for manslaughter. But the state is pushing for up to 40 years, citing aggravating factors like abuse of power and killing in the presence of children. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.